Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman, and our next guests up are Evan Macedo, Vice President, Finance and Operations, Sapers and Wallack. Good to see you, Evan.
Good to see you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. Always exciting to be on the show.
You want to introduce our guest in the studio today?
Absolutely. So our guest, I'll steal a little bit of his thunder. He's got 25 years in the asset management industry. Spent the last 10 years head of the North American equities for Aberdeen Standard Investments. Has spent 16 years researching and investing in the U.S. aerospace and defense industry. So I'd like to introduce our next guest, Jeff Morris, founder of JGM Consultancy. Welcome, Jeff.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Jeff, it's a real pleasure to have you on. We've got a real space cadet, or maybe a space general. So really fascinating background. Tell us about your background and how you made that transition from researching the industry to being in the industry, I guess.
Well, yeah. So my career has been in the bulk of my career has really been in asset management. So most recently, I was running the North American equities business for Aberdeen Standard Investments, also managing stock portfolios, and then, as Evan mentioned, covering the U.S. aerospace and defense industry for 16 years. I decided to take a different career path, and in 2020, I've been doing some consulting. So really, just wanted to build on that expertise that I'd learned in industry, and kind of take my career in a different direction.
So I'd imagine there's, we all hear of the big launches. In fact, it's quite timely today. We've got a launch into space. There was one in the last week or two where the proverbial billionaire space race. Why is there such an interest, and tell us a little bit about the aspects of commercialization of the industry and why there's so much money being poured into that today?
Yeah, so I mean, space tourism is occupying an awful lot of the headlines right now, and justifiably so. This is an exciting industry, but it is kind of a niche. It's going to be for only the ultra wealthy for quite a while. There's also some other things that are happening, I would say, more in the more kind of in the bulk of the industry where we're seeing the major changes. If we think back to the 1960s, space was dominated by the military, NASA, putting people on the moon. And then in the 1990s, there was a big emphasis on satellite communications. Iridium was one of those new satellite constellations that provided cell phone service everywhere on the globe. Now what we're seeing is really a transformation in terms of widening out the accessibility to space. It's driven in part by falling launch costs, these reusable rockets like we saw today and like we see with SpaceX and some others. That really is dropping the cost to get to space. Now, what you put up there, in the past, they used to build these geosynchronous satellites, which we still do, but many of these satellites were hundreds of millions, took years to build. And now we're just becoming a much smaller, much more agile industry in some respects. So these small, low Earth orbit satellites are going up, much quicker and cheaper. Then you're also getting higher speed data rates. So it's really, a lot of new technology is coming to fore. There's also a lot more capital too. So, in 2018, we saw about $2 billion going into equity investments into private space ventures. That hit $6 billion last year in a pretty rocky year for the market. So lots going on, a lot of entrepreneurs getting involved, and just sort of new business models, which are, fascinating to see how they'll all evolve.
So sorry, Evan, like any industry, I would imagine what we're seeing in terms of the commercialization and the big players that are there's a whole host of little guys that support them across the board from many facets. So we see a huge industry in terms of employment. I would imagine that's been exponentially growing as well.
Yeah, there's a whole supply chain. There's the big companies, the big defense contractors that we associate with space travel. They have enormous supply chains, but there's also smaller companies, that are launching themselves. I guess pun intended, but smaller companies that are getting involved, and just sort of that accessibility of playing in this market is increasing.
And Jeff, I find it unbelievably fascinating, the whole commercialization to space, the race to space. And your background of how you got into it. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the projects you're actively working on?
Yeah, so my in my consulting role, I had a few different projects that ranged anywhere from like technology implementation to some regulatory kind of compliance sorts of things. Right now I'm working for a company called Orbit Fab, which I can talk a little bit about their business model, but they're involved in this on-orbit servicing, sort of a new industry that's being created, and I'm doing some work with that company right now, but just really interested in being a part of this, industry and helping, helping these companies succeed. So my career of investing in the large public companies for 16 years was a great place to get advantage of understanding, some of the technology and just sort of the trends. And, now I'm looking at it from a different perspective.
And I know in these last couple of weeks, we're seeing the first billionaires of the world get up into space, float around for a little bit and come back down. I know a lot of people will be excited, which means that there'll be, maybe not all of the common people, but maybe some of the ultra high net worth people might be able to get up to space and kind of check it out in their lifetime. So do you have any idea of what the next 5 to 10 years in this commercialization space world we might be looking at?
Yeah, so, and I think you mentioned sort of the space tourism. I think that will be a niche business for a while, but I've seen some of the business models where, that price point starts to come down. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, you've got, we'll still see more of the same, more capital being committed, new business models. I've seen some estimates over the next 10 years that there'll be 25,000 low Earth orbit satellites being launched. This is obviously a large number, and historically satellites have been, well, you call it disposable. I mean, they couldn't be repaired, they couldn't be refueled. But now there's this, I mentioned, on orbit servicing, where companies like Orbit Fab are building gas stations in space. Northrop Grumman has also been, successful in doing some of the satellite servicing. So I think it's these new business models will evolve. Another one will be just like, what do we do with the satellites that are no longer functioning, and how do we deorbit them? There's the risk of collision. What do we do with the space junk? You got companies like Astroscale out there with business models about how to deal with that. I think further out, maybe it's not 5 to 10 years, but the mining of asteroids in the moon sounds pretty far-fetched right now. But if we think about it, a video phone call from a handheld device was pretty far-fetched not that long ago, and it's pervasive right now. So I think we're going to see some of these new business models evolve, and then probably the highest conviction prediction I have is we're going to see consolidation and fallout. I mean, I was investing through the kind of the tech bubble and saw that cycle. I mean, we're seeing a lot of money come into the industry, a lot of great new technologies being brought to the fore, but there's going to be a shakeout and consolidation at some point. We saw this tech stocks, some of them grew to the sky, but then many did not, and that's sort of a natural part of the capitalistic process.
Is the industry follow a lot of sort of the traditional geographic sort of concentration? Is it concentrated around aerospace, universities that have aerospace programs? Is it dispersed across the country, or are there some real hotbeds, in terms of concentration of these companies?
Yeah, it feels like it's fairly well dispersed, but there are, you see companies, looking to locate into some of the areas where there has been, historical, space activity. So when you're talking about Florida, we're seeing, some things in Texas. Colorado also has a very large space community. Lockheed's a major employer in that region, but then you've got Raytheon, you've got Ball Aerospace out there, Maxar and some other companies, and then also where entrepreneurs have traditionally been located on the West Coast. So it feels like it's fairly well dispersed, but with just some concentrations around these spaceports that have been created.
And in terms of the applications that are being developed, you talked about just an enormous amount of investment into the industry. But beyond that, you talked about broadly the supply chain, but I would imagine for every company that launches a space vehicle for space tourism, there's probably 50 companies that are, making the fuel injectors and the, onboard computers and the, everything that just applies. It just must be enormous in terms of the opportunities to service the small number of companies that are actually launching vehicles.
Yeah, just the a lot of different companies, and like every little device and widget, and it's a bit analogous to like a commercial aerospace. Like these parts are all have to be very specifically designed. They have to go through rigorous there's rigorous testing, and the just the technological requirements makes everything that much more intense, but then also creates opportunity. And when you think about like what entrepreneurs look for, is evolving technology and a large addressable market, and thinking about space just being we don't know if it's infinite, but it's certainly it's certainly very large and evolving. So it's an area where you're attracting some incredible minds, some incredible talent, and very innovative approaches.
Sounds to me like we're going to need somebody doing some air traffic control at some point with the volume of activity we have going on up there.
Yeah, that is a question. You start to look at some of these maps of the constellations, and things look pretty busy. Yeah, pretty busy up there. And I mentioned sort of just that how to manage the space junk, as well as just different orbital planes, etc. It's going to start to get increasingly crowded, but you kind of get further out, once you start thinking about some of these moon missions or to other places, some of these private companies are even have on the manifest of sending missions, unmanned missions to Venus and to Mars and so forth. So there's a lot of room for upside.
So I have a sort of off the wall question a little bit, but I'm curious. We had the space races you talked about in the late 50s and 60s. That was a big point of nationalistic pride and getting first. And then obviously in the commercial sector, we've got a lot of competitive forces at play. Is there tend to be collaboration or competitiveness within the industry because it's so relatively new? What do you see from your consulting perspective? The companies hold everything very close to the vest, or there's a lot of forums and collaboration going on?
Yeah, I see more of the collaboration going on. I mean, clearly there'd be companies that are in direct competition, but in many cases, a successful company that can demonstrate the technology really opens up the opportunity for others to play as well. It validates that particular type of business model, and success also in terms of capital availability and so forth. I mean, the more successful business models that turn from a technology into a business just helps attract more capital and lower the cost of funding for everyone in the industry. Sure, there's probably some rivalries on certain programs, but I think there's a realization that the opportunity is so great that that more can business models can be better served by a degree of collaboration and understanding of best practices.
Fabulous. Jeff Morris, JGM Consultancy, it's been a pleasure having you on Radio Entrepreneurs. If people want to reach out to you, talk a little bit more about your business, talk about the industry in general and how they might get involved or seek out your assistance, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is Jeff Morris CFA on LinkedIn. And while I've been doing some consulting, I am looking for a full-time role, and I have a dialogue going on with several companies looking for something in space or another dynamic industry. So really looking for that. And if anyone wants to reach me, it's best to use that LinkedIn, Jeff Morris CFA. Thank you very much.
Excellent. It's been a real pleasure having you on Radio Entrepreneurs. I can honestly say it's the first time I think I've talked in detail about the space industry, but it certainly sounds fascinating and huge opportunities for growth. So I wish you continued success and as you evolve and the industry evolves along with you. And thank you to Evan Macedo. Always a pleasure to have you side by side. Evan Macedo, Vice President of Finance and Operations with Sapers and Wallack.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I also want to say that this is an FEI segment, Financial Executives International. one of the premier financial networking groups in Boston. If anyone's looking to improve their networking and meet up with a bunch of senior financial leaders, I would highly suggest you check us out. It's feiboston.org. If you want to reach out to me, Evan Macedo from Sapers and Wallack, you can reach us at sapers-wallack.com, and then you can go to our team page and get all of my contact information there. So I'd love to talk to you if you want to meet.
Excellent. Evan, Jeff, a great pleasure having you guys on Radio Entrepreneurs, and we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.